The first gunshot cracked like thunder in the evening air as Delilah Hargrove clutched her husband's bloodied coat to her chest, falling to her knees beside the train tracks that had promised to carry them to a new life in California. The April sunset of 1876 painted the Kansas sky in cruel beauty, indifferent to the shattering of her world that had occurred moments before when bandits attacked their train. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face, her honey blonde hair falling loose from its careful arrangement as she knelt there, shoulders shaking with each sob. The other passengers had been herded back onto the train after the robbery, but Delilah wouldn't move. Not when James's body had been carelessly tossed from the train by the bandits after they'd shot him for trying to protect her wedding ring. "Madam," the deep voice broke through her grief like a distant bell. "Madam, you can't stay out here. Night's coming and there are coyotes." Delilah looked up through swollen eyes to see a tall figure silhouetted against the dimming sky. A cowboy, dusty from the trail, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His wagon stood a few yards away, two horses stamping impatiently. "I don't care," she whispered, her voice raw. "Let them come." The stranger stepped closer, and she could see him more clearly now. Weathered face, kind eyes the color of a summer storm, and a mouth set in a grim line of concern. "Name's Tucker Sloan, madam. I'm mighty sorry for your trouble, but I can't leave you out here to die." Without waiting for her permission, he bent down and gently lifted her into his arms, her husband's coat still clutched in her grasp. "No," Delilah protested weakly, but exhaustion and grief had drained her strength. "My husband, we'll come back for him proper," Tucker promised, his voice gentle but firm as he carried her to his wagon. "But you're no good to his memory dead yourself." As he settled her onto the wooden bench of the wagon, Delilah felt the last of her resistance crumble. This stranger's unexpected kindness unleashed a fresh torrent of tears. "There now," Tucker said awkwardly, pulling a somewhat clean handkerchief from his pocket and offering it to her. "Where were you headed before?" He trailed off, not wanting to speak directly of the tragedy. "California," Delilah managed between sobs. "We were going to start a new life. James had land waiting, his brother's place in Sacramento." Tucker climbed up beside her, took the reins in his calloused hands and clicked his tongue at the horses. "I'm headed to my ranch about 10 miles from here. You can rest there tonight, and tomorrow we'll come back for your husband and give him a proper burial." The wagon jolted forward, and Delilah clutched the side to steady herself. She had no choice but to trust this stranger. In the gathering darkness, with grief clouding her mind, she watched the railroad tracks disappear behind them, feeling as though her heart was being torn in two directions. "I don't even know where I am," she whispered. Tucker kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Just outside Cottonwood Falls. My ranch is north of there. It's not much, but it's shelter." They rode in silence as the stars emerged one by one. Delilah's tears gradually subsided, replaced by a hollow numbness that seemed to spread through her entire body. The rhythmic creaking of the wagon wheels became hypnotic, almost comforting in its constancy. "Did you see what happened?" she finally asked. "Were you there when they killed him?" Tucker shook his head. "No, madam. I was riding back from town when I saw the train stopped and heard the commotion. By the time I got close enough, the bandits were gone and the train was pulling away. Then I saw you there alone." "They left me," Delilah said in disbelief. "The conductor said they couldn't delay any longer. Said I could catch the next train if I wanted, but I couldn't. I couldn't leave James out there alone." Tucker's hands tightened on the reins. "That ain't right, leaving a woman alone out here. I insisted," she said softly. "It was my choice." The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the rolling prairie. In the distance, a coyote howled, its mournful cry echoing Delilah's own grief. She shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Not much farther now," Tucker said, noticing her discomfort. "You'll see the lights of the ranch house soon." True to his word, within 20 minutes, a warm glow appeared on the horizon. As they drew closer, Delilah could make out a modest homestead, a main house built of sturdy logs, a barn, and several smaller outbuildings. A dog's bark greeted their approach. "That's just Blue," Tucker explained as he guided the wagon into the yard. "He sounds fierce, but he's gentle as a lamb." As if to prove his point, a large blue heeler bounded toward them, tail wagging furiously as Tucker brought the wagon to a stop. The front door of the house opened and a woman stepped onto the porch holding a lantern high. "Tucker, that you?" she called. "Yes, Aunt Beatrice," he answered. "And I've brought a guest. This lady's had some trouble." Tucker jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Delilah. His strong hands circled her waist as he lifted her down, and for a moment she felt steadied by his strength. Then reality crashed back and she swayed on her feet. "Easy now," he murmured, keeping a supportive arm around her as he guided her toward the house. Aunt Beatrice was a stout woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Her sharp eyes took in Delilah's tear-stained face and disheveled appearance in one comprehensive glance. "Land's sakes, child, you look half dead. Come in, come in." She stepped aside, ushering them into a warm kitchen that smelled of bread and coffee. Tucker explained the situation in brief, quiet words while Delilah sat mutely at the kitchen table, still clutching James's coat. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She was a widow, alone in a strange place with nothing but the clothes on her back and whatever was in her small traveling bag, which she'd left on the train in her haste to follow James's body. "You poor dear," Beatrice said, placing a steaming cup of tea in front of her. "Drink this. It'll help settle your nerves." Delilah obediently took a sip, the hot liquid burning a path down her throat, reminding her she was still alive. "I'll go ready the spare room," Beatrice said, touching Delilah's shoulder gently before disappearing down a hallway. Tucker removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. He hung the hat on a peg by the door and sat across from her at the table. "Mrs. Hargrove, Delilah," she interrupted, her voice barely audible. "Please call me Delilah," he nodded. "Delilah. I promise you we'll go back at first light. Your husband will have a proper burial." "Thank you," she whispered, looking down at the tea. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "No need for that," Tucker said firmly. "It's what any decent person would do." But they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. The West was a hard place, and many would have ridden past, not wanting to involve themselves in a stranger's tragedy. Beatrice returned and led Delilah to a small but clean bedroom at the back of the house. She provided a nightgown and promised to help wash Delilah's clothes in the morning. Left alone, Delilah sank onto the edge of the bed, still holding James's coat. She brought it to her face, inhaling the lingering scent of him, tobacco and bay rum and something uniquely James. Fresh tears welled up as she realized this scent would fade, just as her memories of him might someday blur around the edges. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by dreams of gunfire and blood. She woke before dawn, disoriented and panicked until memory flooded back. Grief settled over her like a heavy blanket as she dressed in yesterday's clothes, carefully folding the borrowed nightgown. In the kitchen, she found Tucker already awake, drinking coffee at the table. He stood when she entered. "Morning," he said quietly. "There's coffee if you'd like some." She nodded, grateful for the normalcy of the offer. "Yes, please." He poured her a cup, then sat back down. "I've got the wagon ready. Aunt Beatrice put together some breakfast we can take with us." "You're very kind," Delilah said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Both of you." Tucker looked uncomfortable with the praise. "It's nothing, just being neighborly." After a quick breakfast, they set out as the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with pink and gold. The morning was cool, promising a beautiful spring day that seemed a mockery of Delilah's grief. They rode mostly in silence, Delilah lost in memories of James, their 5 short years of marriage, the plans they'd made for California. Tucker respected her quiet, keeping his attention on the trail and the horses. When they reached the spot where he'd found her the previous evening, Delilah's breath caught in her throat. In the harsh light of day, the reality was even more brutal. James lay where he had fallen, his body already beginning to show signs of exposure to the elements. Tucker helped her down from the wagon, then retrieved a shovel from the back. "There's a nice spot under that cottonwood," he said gently. "Has a view of the valley." Delilah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She knelt beside James while Tucker began digging the grave. His body was cold and stiff, his face peaceful despite the violence of his death. She straightened his clothes as best she could, combing his hair with her fingers, whispering words of love and farewell that only he would hear. It took nearly 2 hours for Tucker to dig a proper grave. By then, the sun was high, and sweat dampened his shirt despite the cool spring air. When he was finished, he came and stood quietly beside Delilah. "I'm ready," she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. Together they wrapped James in a blanket Tucker had brought. With as much dignity as possible, Tucker carried him to the grave and laid him gently inside. He stepped back, hat in hand, while Delilah said her final goodbyes. She had no flowers to place with him, but she removed her wedding ring, the very thing James had died protecting, and pressed it into his cold hand. "Keep it safe for me," she whispered, "until we meet again." When she nodded to Tucker, he began to fill the grave. Each thud of earth striking the blanket-wrapped form felt like a blow to Delilah's heart. She stood motionless, tears flowing freely down her face as the man she loved disappeared forever beneath the Kansas soil. Tucker worked silently, efficiently, his respect evident in every careful movement. When the grave was filled, he used stones to create a marker, promising to return later with a proper wooden cross. "Would you like to say some words?" he asked quietly. Delilah nodded, then spoke through her tears. "James Hargrove was a good man, a loving husband. He deserved better than this, but he died as he lived protecting what he loved." Her voice broke. "Rest in peace, my love." Tucker removed his hat and bowed his head. "Lord, receive this good man into your keeping. Comfort those who mourn him. Amen." "Amen," Delilah echoed softly. They stood in silence for a long moment before Tucker gently touched her elbow. "We should head back before the heat of the day." The return journey passed in a blur for Delilah. Grief had hollowed her out, leaving her numb and exhausted. She was vaguely aware of Tucker's concerned glances, but she couldn't summon the energy to reassure him. Back at the ranch, Aunt Beatrice took one look at Delilah's face and ushered her straight to bed, despite it being only mid-afternoon. This time, exhaustion overcame grief and Delilah fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke the next morning feeling oddly calm. The pain was still there, a constant ache in her chest, but the shock had worn off, leaving a strange clarity in its wake. She needed to decide what to do next. Over breakfast, she broached the subject. "I should take the next train to Sacramento. James's brother is expecting us." She corrected herself, the words still unfamiliar and painful. Tucker and Beatrice exchanged a glance. "The next eastbound train doesn't come through until Thursday," Tucker said. "That's 3 days from now." "Oh," Delilah hadn't considered this. "I suppose I could stay in town until then." "Nonsense," Beatrice declared firmly. "You'll stay right here with us." "No sense spending your money on a hotel room when we've got a perfectly good bed going unused." Delilah started to protest, but Tucker interrupted gently. "Please stay, Delilah, at least until you're stronger." Looking at their kind faces, Delilah felt tears threatening again. "Thank you," she managed. "If you're sure it's no trouble." "No trouble at all," Beatrice assured her. "Now, how about helping me with these dishes? Keeping busy helps when the heart is heavy." The next 3 days fell into a simple rhythm. Delilah helped Beatrice with household chores during the day, finding comfort in the familiar routines of cooking and cleaning. Tucker was often out working the ranch, mending fences, checking on cattle, or training horses in the corral. Delilah found herself watching him sometimes from the kitchen window. There was a quiet competence to everything he did, a steadiness that she found reassuring in a world that had suddenly become so uncertain. On the second evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, Delilah asked about his life. "Have you always been a rancher?" Tucker leaned back in his chair, stretching his long legs out in front of him. "Not always. Tried my hand at a few things first. Was a cavalry scout for a while after the war, did some cattle driving, even panned for gold once if you can believe it." He smiled wryly. "Didn't find any." "What brought you here?" she asked, genuinely interested. "Aunt Beatrice," he said simply. "Uncle Frank passed 5 years ago. She wrote asking if I could help with the place for a spell. I came, meaning to stay a month or two." He shrugged. "Never left. Found I had a knack for horses and liked the quiet life." "It is peaceful here," Delilah agreed, looking out over the rolling hills that glowed golden in the setting sun. "What about you?" Tucker asked. "Before all this." Delilah took a deep breath. It hurt to talk about her past life, but it also felt important to speak James's name to acknowledge the life they'd shared. "I grew up in St. Louis. My father was a watchmaker. I met James at a church social when I was 18. He worked for the railroad then, but he had dreams of having his own land someday." She smiled sadly at the memory. "We married a year later. Lived in a little house in town while James saved every penny for land out west." "His brother has a place in Sacramento," Tucker prompted gently when she fell silent. Delilah nodded. "William went out there 10 years ago, did well for himself. When he heard James wanted land, he wrote about a neighboring property for sale, said we could work it together." She twisted her hands in her lap. James was so excited, it was all he talked about for months. "You'll still go then?" Tucker asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I suppose I must. I have nowhere else to go and William is expecting us." "Me," she corrected herself again, the slip making her wince. Tucker was quiet for a long moment. "You know, there's no rush to decide. You could stay here a while longer, at least until you're sure what you want." Delilah looked at him in surprise. "That's very generous, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition," he said quickly. "Aunt Beatrice loves having another woman around and—" He hesitated. "Well, you'd be welcome is all." Something in his tone made Delilah study his face more carefully. In the fading light, his features were softened, vulnerable. She realized with a start that he might be lonely here despite his aunt's company. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll think about it." Thursday arrived too quickly. Tucker drove Delilah into town, her few belongings, James's coat and the clothes Beatrice had helped her wash, packed in a small bundle. They waited on the platform in awkward silence, both aware that this might be goodbye. "Will you write?" Tucker finally asked. "Let us know you arrived safely." "Of course," Delilah promised, touched by his concern. When the train whistle sounded in the distance, Tucker turned to face her fully. "Delilah, I know it's too soon and I don't mean to presume, but—" He took a deep breath. "If Sacramento doesn't work out, or if you ever want to come back this way, there'll always be a place for you at the ranch." Delilah's heart gave a strange little jump at his words, surprising her. "Thank you, Tucker. That means more than I can say." The train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and billowing steam. Passengers began disembarking, creating a bustle of activity around them. "Well," Tucker said, lifting her bundle, "I guess this is goodbye for now." Impulsively, Delilah stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. "Thank you for everything. I'll never forget your kindness." Tucker's face reddened, but he smiled. "Safe journey, Delilah." As she boarded the train and found a seat by the window, Delilah felt a curious reluctance. She waved to Tucker as the train began to move, watching his tall figure grow smaller until he disappeared around a bend. The journey to Sacramento was long and lonely. Delilah had too much time to think, to remember, to grieve. By the time she arrived, she was exhausted and uncertain. William Hargrove met her at the station, his resemblance to James a painful shock. He embraced her awkwardly, his own grief evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "I still can't believe it," he said as he loaded her small bundle into his wagon. "When I got your telegram." "James was always so careful." "He died protecting me," Delilah said quietly, "protecting my wedding ring from the bandits." William shook his head sadly. "That sounds like him, always putting others first." The ride to William's ranch was filled with stilted conversation. William was clearly trying to be kind, but there was an underlying tension that made Delilah uncomfortable. When they arrived, William's wife Martha greeted her warmly, but Delilah sensed reluctance behind her smile. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed in their spare room, Delilah faced the truth she'd been avoiding. She didn't belong here. William and Martha had their own life, their own plans. The neighboring property James had wanted to buy had already been sold to someone else. There was no place for her here, no purpose. For a week, she tried to make herself useful, helping Martha with household chores and learning about the ranch operations. But the awkwardness persisted, and Delilah increasingly felt like an unwelcome reminder of their loss. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset, she found herself thinking of Tucker's ranch in Kansas. Of the peaceful hills, Aunt Beatrice's warm kitchen, and Tucker's steady presence. She remembered his words. "If you ever want to come back this way, there'll always be a place for you at the ranch." Could she go back? The idea took root, growing stronger with each passing day. There was nothing for her here in Sacramento, but in Kansas there had been something. A connection, perhaps. The beginnings of friendship, at least. 2 weeks after arriving in Sacramento, Delilah approached William with her decision. "I'm grateful for your hospitality," she told him, "but I think it's time I moved on." Relief flickered across his face before he could hide it. "Are you sure? You're welcome to stay as long as you need." "I'm sure," Delilah said, more confident now. "There's somewhere else I need to be." William didn't ask questions, just offered to purchase her train ticket back east. 3 days later, Delilah was on a train heading back to Kansas, a curious lightness in her heart despite the grief that still lingered. She hadn't written to Tucker or Beatrice about her decision, partly because there hadn't been time, but also because she feared they might have forgotten her. What if Tucker's offer had been mere politeness? What if she arrived to find herself unwelcome? By the time the train pulled into Cottonwood Falls, Delilah's confidence had wavered considerably. She stood on the platform, her small bundle clutched to her chest, suddenly uncertain. The station was busy, and no one paid her any particular attention as she tried to decide what to do next. She could hire a wagon to take her to the Sloan Ranch, but what if they turned her away? Perhaps she should stay in town for a night, send a message first. Delilah. She whirled around at the sound of her name, her heart leaping. Tucker stood a few yards away, staring at her as if he couldn't quite believe his eyes. He was dressed in his work clothes, dust on his boots and hat, clearly not expecting to see her. "Tucker," she breathed, relief washing over her. I came back." He closed the distance between them in a few long strides. "I can see that," he said, a smile breaking across his face. "What happened? Sacramento didn't work out." Delilah shook her head. "It wasn't home," she said simply. Tucker seemed to understand all she wasn't saying. He took her bundle from her arms. "Well, I'm mighty glad to see you. Aunt Beatrice will be over the moon. She's been missing your company something fierce." "Just Aunt Beatrice?" Delilah asked before she could stop herself. Tucker's eyes met hers, serious now. "No," he said quietly, "not just her." The honesty in his gaze made Delilah's cheeks warm. "I missed you too," she admitted. "Both of you." Tucker offered his arm. "I've got the wagon outside, was just in town picking up supplies. Talk about good timing." As they walked toward the wagon, Delilah felt a sense of rightness that had been missing since James's death. This wasn't a betrayal of his memory, she realized. It was a continuation of life, something he would have wanted for her. The months that followed were a time of healing for Delilah. She settled into life at the ranch, helping Beatrice with the household and gradually learning about ranch operations from Tucker. They fell into an easy friendship, spending evenings on the porch talking about everything and nothing. Tucker never pushed for more, seeming to understand that Delilah needed time. But as summer turned to fall, she found herself increasingly aware of him as a man, his quiet strength, his kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. One crisp October evening, they rode out to check on a new foal born to one of Tucker's favorite mares. The sunset painted the prairie in shades of gold and crimson as they sat on a hilltop watching the mother and baby graze. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Tucker said, nodding toward the horizon. "Yes," Delilah agreed, but she was looking at him, not the sunset. Tucker turned, catching her gaze. Something changed in his expression, a softening, a question. "Delilah," he said quietly, "I've been wanting to ask you something for a while now." Her heart quickened. "Yes." "I know you still care for James. I would never ask you to forget him." Tucker removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "But I've grown to care for you more than I thought possible, and I was wondering if maybe someday you might considering me." Delilah's throat tightened with emotion. "Oh, Tucker, I've been considering you for quite some time now." Hope dawned in his eyes. "You have," she nodded, reaching out to take his hand. "James will always be part of me, but my heart didn't die with him. It's still beating, still capable of love." She squeezed his fingers. "And it's been telling me for weeks now that it's yours if you want it." Tucker's face broke into a radiant smile. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I want it more than anything in this world." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Tucker leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as Delilah responded, her arms slipping around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Delilah Hargrove." "And I love you, Tucker Sloan," she whispered, the words feeling both strange and completely right on her lips. They married that December in the small church in Cottonwood Falls. Aunt Beatrice cried through the entire ceremony, declaring it the happiest day of her life. As Tucker slipped a simple gold band onto Delilah's finger, not replacing her first wedding ring, but creating a new bond beside it, she thought of that terrible day by the train tracks. How she had believed her life was over, that there could be no happiness after such loss. Yet here she was, beginning again, her heart full of love for this good man who had lifted her, quite literally, from the depths of despair. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of the ranch house, their home now, Tucker wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them gazing up at the star-filled Kansas sky. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. Delilah leaned back into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart against her back. "More than I ever thought I could be again," she answered truthfully. Life wouldn't always be easy. The West was still wild, ranching was hard work, and there would be struggles ahead. But they would face them together, two hearts that had found each other in the most unexpected circumstances. And sometimes, in quiet moments, Delilah would remember a grief-stricken woman kneeling beside train tracks, and the cowboy who had lifted her into his wagon and, ultimately, into a new life filled with love.